Thanks, Brandon and Crystal and Jesse. We've been talking this morning to some extent about the risk factors in cities, non-inclusive innovation agendas, non-inclusive pipelines. How do we turn them into the inclusive innovation, inclusive pipeline? So to give us a chance to talk about other dimensions of the risk factors facing cities and the goal of our discussion, de-risking cities, we've asked Jim O'Gara, Managing Director at Deloitte Advisory based in Arlington, Virginia, to put together a panel. Jim, panelists, come and join us, and let's get into the risk factors and the de-risking. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. How are we? Had a good night last night, I hope. Okay, now we're getting into risky business today. And to help us along in this, I've got two very distinguished gentlemen who have a lot of experience in dealing with risk in urban and county environments. First of all, briefly about myself, I'm with Deloitte Advisory, as Gordon said. We approach urban development from a few lenses, and like many people in this room, I don't want to say struggling because somebody will write that down and report it, but we are grappling with the concept of smart cities. And we look at it through several lenses. One is obviously from a financial advisory perspective, how to mobilize more resources. We are a technology firm, so we do look at data-driven approaches and performance monitoring and that kind of thing. But there's a group of us within the firm who work mostly actually in emerging markets who look at governance and transparency and the integration of these things to improve the performance of cities. So that's why Deloitte probably is not a name you associate with urban development and smart cities, but we do this and have been for years under various guises. I'm going to let the other speakers on the panel here introduce themselves because they can do far more eloquently than I could. But I do want to say one thing about this gentleman here on my right, Armand Budish. I was reading the little introduction in the leaflet, and you didn't tell me that you're a TV presenter. So, the stakes are high up here, so please, guys, go easy on me, So, Armand, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Sure. My name is Armand Budish. I'm the county executive for Cuyahoga County in Ohio. Cuyahoga County is Cleveland and 58 other cities and villages surrounding. And I'm the politician in the group, and politicians tend to get blamed for everything that goes wrong. So when there's something that goes right, we should also get the credit, don't you think? So
yes.
Did you hear that the Cleveland Cavaliers won the NBA championship? And the Cleveland Indians are in the World Series?
Yes. I'm
just saying. We also this year hosted a very successful Republican National Convention. And I emphasize that because, of the situation in the country. I think a lot of people expected to see scenes out of the Democratic Convention of 1968, and we did not have any incidents whatsoever. And that was due to a really strong collaboration of all law enforcement and the entire community, the faith community and nonprofits all came together to make sure that, to the extent we could, that it would be a peaceful and safe convention for everybody, and it was. In Cuyahoga County, we're focused on economic development and opportunity across the county for everyone, and we focus on building on our strengths. And in Cuyahoga County, we have some really strong strengths. I would start with healthcare. We are in my view, the healthcare capital of the world. We have the Cleveland Clinic, university hospitals. The county invested $100 million in the Global Center for Health Innovation, which is truly a center for innovation in the healthcare world. We're bringing in new businesses through the strength of our healthcare community. Groups like HIMSS and IBM Watson have come to Cleveland. We're attracting major conventions and conferences like the Connect-a-thon, which brings together hundreds of engineers that come together for a week. They each represent different companies. They work on competing products, making them talk together. Interoperability, very significant. The Cleveland Clinic just hosted their Innovation Summit at the Global Center for Health Innovation. 2,000 innovators in the healthcare world came together for that event. And we have other strengths. I'll just mention one other that I was reminded of this morning as I was taking my shower and the water was trickling out of the shower. We have water, fresh water in Cleveland, Ohio. We are on the Great Lakes, the largest source of fresh water in the world. And so we can take a shower whenever we want, and we can water our lawns. And we're using that source, that resource, to attract business. And not just what you would think in terms of recreation, et cetera, but we have a strong manufacturing history in Northeast Ohio. And most manufacturers need large quantities of fresh water, and we're able to use that to attract business to Northeast Ohio. So things are exciting in Cleveland. We're working hard. We have a long way to go, but we're very excited about the upswing right now.
Very good. And Paul Silvern is a Vice President of HRNA. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your work.
Sure. Good morning, folks. I'm with HRNA Advisors, which generically is a economic development, real estate advisory, and public policy consulting firm headquartered in New York City, with other offices where I am in Los Angeles and Dallas and Washington, D.C. We work on a number of very wide-ranging transformational projects in major urban communities all over North America and occasionally overseas, ranging from large-scale mixed-use development projects to transit-oriented development of different kinds, including both high-speed rail and other forms of rail, and other kinds of projects, waterfront revitalization and signature urban park projects, including the High Line and Brooklyn Bridge Park in New York City, and reconnecting the downtown Seattle with the waterfront after the Alaska Way freeway is torn down. But the area where we've been concentrating a lot in the last several years, which I think may be of probably more significant interest to the group here today, is the work that we've been doing in the urban resilience movement, which, as some of you may know, came onto the public policy scene very prominently in the wake of Superstorm Sandy when it hit the East Coast in 2012 and 13, and spawned a very significant reevaluation of what cities may need to do in order to protect themselves against shocks related to weather and climate change, and prompted very significant investments in these issues by the federal government, particularly through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and then led soon thereafter to a very interesting program sponsored by the Rockefeller Foundation called the 100 Resilient Cities Program, which is funding chief resilience officers, key staff people at the upper echelons of public administration in selected cities around the world to begin to think about how to assess using very sophisticated data techniques and plan strategies in an interdisciplinary and community-based way to begin to understand how to insulate communities and prepare communities for recovery after major events take place, whether it's natural disasters or human-made disasters of various kinds, like civil unrest, or the kinds of systemic problems that major cities around the country, if not the world, are facing, having to do with social dislocation, chronic unemployment, lack of education, and lack of affordable housing, and other kinds of systemic problems that are chronic in nature. We've been working with probably 9 or 10 cities around the U.S. to formulate these strategies And although we're not working on them specifically, the three of the communities here in the Bay Area, San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland, are participating in that program and have all published very recently very detailed sets of strategies for addressing these issues in those three cities, which I would commend to you for review. Other cities that we're working with doing comparable work are as wide-ranging as Boston, Norfolk, New Orleans, Tulsa, Oklahoma, El Paso, New York, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and others. So it's a very interesting movement that's pioneering a lot of new techniques for beginning to understand both some of the physical and sort of technical engineering issues about protecting cities from various issues related to natural disasters, but perhaps most importantly, helping to knit together the social infrastructure within cities in order to deal with these shocks and stresses so that they're not only better prepared to deal with them should they occur, but to recover quickly and to use it as a platform for ongoing remediation of underlying difficulties that a lot of urban communities are facing these days.
Great. So we're going to just run through a few of the risk-related aspects of urban development. And I remember being at a conference in the Philippines a couple of years ago, and it was about sustainability and how to come back from the devastating tornadoes and hurricanes they had down there. And one thing that struck me was there was a person from Indonesia that after the tsunami, he was in charge of sort of getting things back in working order. And when he interviewed the villagers along all the coastlines, what do you need? And everybody thought the answer would be, rebuild our houses, put our water systems back, whatever. No, the answer was, we need our boats.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have our boats, we can't make a living. So I think the first area that I'd like to talk about is on the economic opportunity side. And one thing that struck me today, or yesterday, I'm really glad I came on the second day to speak rather than the first day, because I learned so much yesterday, and particularly not to mention Anchorage, Alaska, because you could really be caught out there, and polar bears. But, there's a few recurring themes here, and they do influence, like, trying to run a county or a city, and it has to do with, equality or equity, making sure opportunities are available, that everybody gets to participate in them. And I think, Armand, to you, what are the things you've heard people talk about, people who are not really in the pipeline to benefit? What are you doing in your county to sort of make things better for that group of people?
I spent my first 100 days in office. I've only been in office a year and 3/4, by the way. My first 100 days, I met with 100 business leaders, and I heard over and over and over again, we can't find qualified employees. We have openings, literally in Cuyahoga County, thousands and thousands of job openings, and they couldn't find people with the requisite skills or experience to fill those jobs. And yet we have a high unemployment rate and lots of people who really want to work. So we have this terrible mismatch, and we put already millions and millions of dollars into workforce training and workforce development programs, and there's a number of problems that we face in the way the system works. The system isn't working, truly. A lot of good programs, but the system's not working. We are the county provides the social services that people need when they're not working, and so those are our clients. Our customers, if you will, and we see them every day. So what we need to do, we're doing a number of things. First, we're breaking down the silos between health and human services and economic development. Historically, they're two separate things. We have brought them together, both internally and externally. So in our county government structure, we now have only one tranche that has both economic development and health and human services. And looking outward, we are doing as much as we can to wrap health and human services around workforce development. So, for example, one of the employers that I met with said, he had this great employee, but she stopped coming to work on time, and he was going to have to get rid of her. Something changed. Turned out what changed was she couldn't afford daycare. And so she was missing work, and her child was sick, and she didn't have health care for the child. So we came in, we were able to provide those social services that she needed, and so she could then return to being a great employee. And there's all kinds of stories where you need to be able to wrap the two. So we have thousands of people come through our buildings every year needing to sign up for food stamps or Medicaid or some social service. And we are creating a career center in those buildings where when they come in, they'll get their benefits, we'll sign them up, and then we'll move them over to the next table where we'll have workforce people that can get them on the right path. And we're hiring in the county a series of coaches or mentors that will be able to stay with people beyond just a day or 2 or 3 to sign them up. They will be with them until they get on that right career path where they can get to a sustaining wage in a career. So it won't just be helping them get that first job, it'll be the second, the third, the fourth. We've had to redefine the definition of success. Workforce training, we've been paying providers, and success has been defined as getting a person a job. Even if it was a minimum wage job, even if it had no career path, even if they only stayed in the job 3 months, that was success. That is not success. And we are changing the definition, and we're changing the way we deliver our social services and workforce to make sure that we can fill that pipeline by the people who have the barriers currently.
And Paul, I know that you operate sort of at the macro level in terms of planning and sustainability and urban planning in your own career. So, on the economic opportunity side, I know that citizen involvement is really important when you're planning and sort of to make sure that it's fulfilling the kind of purpose that you want. So, are there examples of where you've sort of seen really good examples of getting citizens involved and where their input has made a big difference?
Well, I think it's becoming more ubiquitous in practically all of the urban planning-related work that all cities and communities are doing across the U.S. for a variety of reasons. And many communities are becoming increasingly sophisticated about using novel techniques for trying to make sure that citizen involvement gets away from the sort of usual toxic public hearing process that I think we're probably all familiar with in our communities, in which the squeaky wheels come up to the microphone and berate progressive public administrators like Armand and others of you who are in the audience today, which is an extremely unfortunate way to get feedback and constructive suggestions about complicated public policy issues. But many of the city planning initiatives that we have been involved in are increasingly using very sophisticated digital technology and sophisticated survey research techniques in order to both sample and assemble and analyze public opinion, but also to try to make sure that the communication is with lots of communities and neighborhoods, many of whom are not typical participants in the public planning process, and making very overt and constructive using techniques to make sure that all voices are heard and have a chance to provide comment and input to the planning process. And that, at least in the 100 Resilient Cities approach to developing strategies to deal with various kinds of shocks and stresses, it's a hallmark of that program to basically develop community-based strategies that really grow out of the points of view and perspectives of local business communities, neighborhoods, resident organizations, business improvement districts, and the like, as well as public administration. But there are a lot of very exciting and interesting new digital technology mechanisms that are being used in order to do that, to assemble data, to post it, to analyze it and present it in ways that make it digestible by average citizens, so that they begin to really undersee the interconnectedness of things in their communities. And I would expect to see that there'll be much more of that as time goes on.
Yeah, a little plug for my colleagues from Buenos Aires here, Alvaro, I see him down there. If any of you got to go to the workshop he was part of yesterday, you'll have seen the very striking example of how a team working with the mayor of Buenos Aires and the ministers there reduced the waiting time for action on maintenance in the city from something like 2.5 years to 4 weeks or something like that. Amazing. So if you want to talk to him about that, it's kind of along the, and it was all done by direct communication by the citizens into the system. The system communicated back to the individuals and said, yeah, I see the photograph of your pothole, I will fix it, and then send them a picture, it's fixed, look. So it made the politicians look very good, right. And so a win-win for everybody in that situation.
Yeah, no, an interesting example of that approach that we took in an effort that was sponsored by a consortium of foundations was an initiative called Talking Transition in New York City, which was an initiative right after Mayor de Blasio was elected, but before he was inaugurated. In that sort of interstitial space of time, is we ran a very sophisticated outreach program across all 5 boroughs in New York to solicit public opinion about policy priorities to inform the programs that the new administration might want to put in place, which utilized a very wide range of public outreach forums, some of which were place-based, where people would come to a location and hear discussions and presentations that were then filmed and broadcast across the city, and in other cases involved sort of tablet-based survey work that was done in communities. And we did something similar for the new mayor of Washington, D.C. A bit later. But these efforts to try to democratize the information gathering and collection and synthesis of opinion, I think, is becoming a very important new approach to public administration.
Yeah. Armand, I just want to turn briefly to financial sustainability. Clearly, a big part of your job is balancing the budget in the county, I imagine, and finding ways to mobilize financial resources. I know we've spoken here at the Meeting of the Minds about the new types of partnerships and financial instruments that are becoming available. What are you using what tools do you have in your toolbox these days to try to sort of keep everything running and get as many financial resources as you can into the system to do what you wish?
Well, as in many states, cities and counties around the country are suffering because of the cutbacks that we're seeing all over, and certainly Ohio is no different. So, every city and county is looking for ways to do more with less, and you get to a point where it gets harder and harder to do that in terms of financing projects. So when I came into office that 1.5 years ago, we found that we had a $68 million budget hole we had to fix, and we had basically no ability to add new debt without dedicated revenue streams because of our difficult general fund situation. So we had to become creative, and we found some new ways to do things. So, for example, traditionally, we would, for major projects, we would issue bonds, like most. Whether it's a developer or a project of our own, we would issue bonds, and we'd have all the costs associated with the bonds. And we do a number of our own projects. We're right now in the middle of remodeling a parking garage for the county. It's about a $20 million project. Instead of going to the bond market, what we're doing is we're what I call self-bonding it. So we have large reserves that sit there and earn about 0.5%, given the state laws and the limitations that we have. So instead of earning 0.5%, we're using those funds to basically issue and buy our own bonds. So we will be paying ourselves back for the bonds. If we charge 3 or 4%, whatever it would be on the market, we can charge less, but we're paying ourselves back. So instead of earning 0.5% in our reserve, we'd now be earning 3%, which is a significant benefit to the county, and we still get the job done, and we save the underwriting costs and the legal costs and the other things that would normally be done in a bond offering. That's one. A second approach that we're using, and I can't talk about the specifics of the project because it's not yet announced, hopefully soon, but a company came to us and asked us to do a major new building for them. It's in the public interest to do this, but it's a lot of money. We're using, some of you may be familiar with TIFs and the way those work. Well, counties don't get, at least in Ohio, don't get income tax, so we can't do a TIF, but we're using our other sources. We're using our sales tax and our bed tax and admissions tax. We can use different taxes. And so we're going to use the increase that we will get from this project in those taxes to fund as the revenue stream for the bonds. Then the question becomes, what's the risk? If the projections don't come out right, we're stuck. We solved that by using this company's projections. We said, we'll accept your projections. You're telling us, because this is going to be such a great project, our sales tax will go up X. We're going to get all this extra money. We will use your projections. But they are guaranteeing it. So by that guarantee, we're protected. If we get the sales tax that was projected, we can pay the bonds. If not, they're going to pay the difference. And that's the way we're dealing with that issue. And just one last funding mechanism that we're using. It's not for infrastructure, but some of you are familiar with the program called Pay for Success. We have been one of the first in this field. We're using it in a project that involves homeless women. There are women that when they become homeless, lose their custody of their kids. The kids come to the county. It goes into foster care. It's not good for public policy, and it's also very expensive. So we're incurring a lot of extra costs. What we've done in this new program is we are doing intensive human and social services to help these women get back to permanent transitional or permanent housing. And when they do that, they will then be able to get custody back of their children. This program is being financed by a host of private and nonprofit and foundations, and they will get paid back with profit based on the savings that we have. And Case Western Reserve University is doing the analysis independently so that we will know exactly, be able to identify what the savings is and what, if any, their return will be. And it's a novel way for cities and counties that are hard-pressed with finances right now to do the right things in the social service area.
Very interesting. And Paul, I know we've been talking earlier about some changes that have been happening in the funding landscape for cities.
Yeah, well, in California in particular, those of you who are from California will probably know that a few years ago we completely dismantled our 60-year-old system of redevelopment and removed the ability for redevelopment agencies in California to use tax increment financing, so that we are now one of, I think, only 3 states in all of America that doesn't have the ability to use that system, except for some very limited opportunities that were just recently approved by the governor and the legislature and still are being tested out. So while that was, I think, a very negative, in my opinion, outcome, despite some of the abuses of the redevelopment process over the history of the program, by and large, I think it was quite successful in place-based, revitalization of disinvested areas. But because of the loss of tax increment financing, it's forced California communities that still struggle, with all of the same issues, to be much more creative in trying to find new replacement sources of funding to provide local matches and to fund the kinds of programs that are required for urban revitalization in their communities. And some of them are, novel bond strategies, variations on some of the more typical tax-exempt bond financing that, as Armand says, are fairly typical. But there are a number of other strategies that are being developed using local tax revenues in more creative ways, some of which we've worked on for individual real estate development projects. But there's also, I think, an emerging interest in seeing and thinking about the degree to which European-style public-private partnerships, or P3 strategies as they're typically known, can be adapted for projects for urban revitalization that go well beyond the transportation infrastructure and social infrastructure, which are the basis for most of those programs in other parts of the world, and seeing to what degree they can be productively adapted to provide new sources of revenue and sort of off-budget financing techniques to help municipalities replace the lost revenues, particularly in places like California that are even more highly constrained these days to fund urban revitalization than many communities around the country.
Yeah. And so one of the challenges, Armand, I imagine, is trying to find ways to keep money flowing in for some of your programs over several administrations, because, you know, I know we talked earlier about your pre-K program, which, you know, I'm sure everybody would agree it's great to get at the issue from the very beginning. But I mean, that needs a sustained investment over many years to be effective. So, I mean, how are you finding ways to sort of overcome the risk that these programs might drop away, or, you know, people will lose interest, or your partner companies won't be able to keep being partners, or?
Well, that's the frequent issue that we have in government, because people are elected for 2-year or 4-year terms typically, and, you know, then they're up for re-election, and the community looks and says, what have you done? Show us what you've done. And if you can't point, they don't want to hear process, they don't want to hear ideas, they want to hear what have you done.
Yeah.
So that puts a lot of pressure on coming up with projects that will have results within 2 or 3 or 4 years.
Right.
Typically not even 4, because you're up for re-election, you're running for 2 years in the way the system works today. So it's difficult. There's no easy answer. You know, you mentioned our pre-K program. In Cuyahoga County, you know, we feel that, you know, I mentioned our very high focus on economic development. Nothing will work, whether it's workforce training or job creation or anything, if we don't start with the kids when they're 3 and 4 years old. We need to make sure that kids at that age get a high-quality start in life. The studies are clear. If you get a high-quality education at age 3 and age 4, you do better during your life. You read at third grade level better. You graduate high school. You go on and get a better job. You're physically and mentally healthier during your life. There's no question that those are the results. But you know, you don't see the results quickly. So we went ahead with a high-quality pre-K program. The county has been funding high-quality pre-K over the last decade to the tune of about $9 million a year. That wasn't enough. So this year, despite our economic problems, we found another $10 million, which also wasn't enough. So we went out to the community, and again, nothing is done without collaboration. Nothing is truly accomplished unless you're working together. So we partnered with the business community and the foundations and others, and we raised a match. We raised actually another $12 million to create a $22 million fund, which will allow us to slightly more than double the number of kids in high-quality pre-K for the next 4 years. It's not the final solution, but we will double the number of kids and make a strong jump forward. Will you see the results within my first term? No. You won't. It's just not going to happen because it takes too long. But hopefully, I'll have done enough other good things to get reelected.
I'm sure.
And by the way, I forgot to mention, but I should. If people have questions or comments about anything that I've mentioned, I should mention that Ted Carter's here. You want to just hold your hand up? Ted is our Director of Economic Development in Cuyahoga County. If you have any complaints, he's the one to talk to. And Joan Chase is here from Digital C, our partner when it comes to digital, everything digital. And George Hillo is here. He's our head of the organization that oversees the Global Center for Health Innovation that I mentioned. So any questions, they're around, and please feel free to talk to them.
I just wanted to finish. We could talk forever about my list of subjects here, and I want to leave a few minutes for people on the floor to ask questions. But you mentioned in your introduction about, the RNC, and, personally, I think that was probably the riskiest thing you've done for a long time, I imagine, for many reasons. But, I think you have a very large county. You've got, if I'm not wrong, you've got 53 cities.
58.
58,
Cleveland, so 59 total,
yeah, within the area. So on public safety and that kind of thing, what are you able to do now with as a result of the technology that's available to be able to improve how safe people feel?
Well, the first, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the RNC was, in my view, incredible, at least what went on outside the auditorium. It was a tremendous success because it was peaceful and people, it was just amazing. I like to think one of our strengths is our people in the Midwest generally, and people are friendly, and they were. You would have people going up to people they didn't know and saying, can I help you? Do you need directions? People were talking to law enforcement, very friendly. Law enforcement was talking to people. We spent months and months, again, collaboratively planning. It was the Secret Service and Homeland Security and the FBI and the city of Cleveland and the various 58 other cities and the county sheriff's department and others all came together to make this work. You mentioned technology, a lot of technology. So we had cameras, mobile cameras that we stationed in different places, which we monitored 24/7. And we made arrangements with the communities beforehand so that this was for live. This was not to try to catch somebody that did something bad after the fact. This was to try to prevent something bad from happening. So we were monitoring it. If they saw anything suspicious, they would immediately call that city, and they would send their police out to check it out.
Yeah.
So we had that under control, so there's a whole lot we're doing with technology. When you have 59 cities, it's difficult, you got to get people together, and you got to get the cities together, and it's got to be collaborative, and we're working on that. So, one last thing, I see you're standing there, is, we have right now a situation where cities have their own databases. If you get stopped with a traffic stop in one city on one side of town, the police officer won't necessarily know that you have a warrant out from another city, which is bad. So we're putting together, again, collaboratively and voluntarily, a joint database where that won't happen anymore. A lot of good things happening.
I think we should move to questions. Paul, we'll let you answer the first question that comes up, okay? No matter what it is.
If it's directed to me, otherwise.
Gordon.
I think the rules allow me to ask a question, so here goes.
Uh-oh.
One of our partners in this endeavor is something called the Internet of Things Talent Consortium, which brings together public entities like the state of Ohio, universities like MIT, private companies like Disney and others. Cisco is one of the leaders and founders along with GE. And their mission is the talent pipeline that we talked about earlier in the morning, but I read the stats about the talent pipeline heading into the public sector, and it doesn't look great. The data scientists are being gobbled up by data-centric companies, and there's not a lot of crumbs left over for public agencies. You've got 58 municipal-type entities under the county umbrella. You've got a county administration, and you've got a lot of quasi-public entities like the transit authorities who have their own hiring. But not a lot of them are ready, willing, or able to take skills, Internet of Things related, or tech-related, urban tech-related, and bring it to a job that maybe should be a priority. Is there a formula that maybe works in other countries or other counties or other states that could be useful to apply in either Ohio or other places, Paul, where you may be working with some of the clients of HR&A? But this is something that I know the Internet of Things Talent Consortium is struggling with. How do you attract into the public sector the kind of people that could help agencies reduce their operating costs, increase their efficiency, and maybe make them 21st century organizations?
Yeah, well, I would just say in a couple examples, I think we're actually seeing a lot of that in communities in California in particular, home to Silicon Valley, of course. So there's an incredible pool of talent that it's available. But I think just in Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti has been very successful in attracting some top-tier talent to begin to think about how to use the data resources that the city information systems produce on a daily basis, but aren't systematically used for policy development. And a number of other cities, of much smaller size, are also, I think, that I know of, have been actually quite successful in attracting talent. I mean, cities produce, as Armand is suggesting, local government produces reams of data about all sorts of things, mostly in individual silos. And the challenge is really, trying to see what the cross connections are between those data so that they can be pooled and deployed in a way for making informed public policies with co-benefits, so that you're not just doing one thing at a time, but solving a number of problems simultaneously. And then there are other initiatives that are being undertaken. We run an annual competition in New York City called Big Apps, which is an opportunity to make municipal data widely available and to encourage entrepreneurs to come up with new applications to try to use that data in productive ways, with prize money. And it's become an interesting new way of making more visible the kinds of interesting data that municipalities and other local governments are producing that have potentially interesting applications.
Armand,
and so that's sort of raising the elevation of attraction.
Are you finding it hard to find talent?
Yes, it's a good question, and there's not a real good answer. If I've been criticized on one thing in my year and a half in office, it's been the salaries that I've had to pay some people. The newspaper loves to put out, just hired somebody for 6 figures. You got to do it to compete. And even with that, I'm not able to attract the talent that we would want strictly by salary. I just can't compete. So I have to do my best on my knees, appeal to their commitment to public service. And there are some people that aren't interested, and some people that are very interested and motivated by doing good for the public. And that's what I have to offer. We've been able to attract some of those people, and I'm very proud of who we've gotten, but the wages are tough.
Okay, so we've run out of time, but I'm going to take one question, and I have to say it's ladies first. I'm sorry. So, madam, you're...
Can I add one thing, because I don't want to forget this. We've started for the first time an innovation department in Cuyahoga County government, which is novel, unique, and very exciting. And the way we were able to do that is we were partnered with the Cleveland Foundation, which is one of the largest community foundations in the country. They believe in innovation and entrepreneurship in the public sector, and they funded it.
Please.
Thank you. My name's Julie Wormser. I work for Boston Harbor now on climate resilience. And with climate, the challenges are both multiple challenges at the same time and the level of uncertainty. So rather than giving the detail, I wanted to ask, if you were a consultant for Job.
For who?
Job, biblical Job.
Oh, yeah, Job.
Who's been hit with challenges, knows something's coming up, doesn't know what. How would you help Job get into the mindset of dealing with uncertainty and multiple challenges as a parallel to what we're trying to deal with cities, to say it's getting worse, but we don't know how?
Yeah, well, I don't think it needs to be Job as the client necessarily, because Rockefeller is...
No, pretend it's Job,
Yeah.
say.
Because as I was suggesting, Rockefeller is funding exactly that kind of initiative, in cities across the United States. And it's a daily exercise of trying to both diagnose and assess the risks, making that visible. A lot of very careful work to interact with local communities, in the business sector, at the neighborhood level, and across all the other sectors within municipalities, to begin to both do the consciousness raising to raise the level of awareness about these issues, but then to work constructively in an interdisciplinary way to begin to develop strategies to address them, and then to monitor them and assess them over time.
Okay,
I think
don't
I
know if
would-
that answers it, but
I would suggest that Job maybe look to move to someplace
like Ohio.
that's safe and beautiful and
God
out of
can't
the
find
way. I was thinking maybe Alaska.
Oh, there you go. Well, look, thank you very much. Armand and Paul, give it up for these guys. They're very good. Thank you.